So, Celeste, to quote you, paraphrasing Shakespeare, some are born to converse, some achieve good conversation through effort, and some have conversations thrust upon them. Which one are you?
Definitely three. I've had these conversations thrust upon me my whole life. So it was either sink or swim.
And when you say those conversations, are you thinking specifically about racial conversations or all the conversations of your vast career?
I come from in many ways a kind of an anachronistic family, and many of the easy answers that make up small talk for other people are not particularly easy for me. So largely race because I'm racially nondescript in some people's view, but lots of conversations are more difficult for me than they are for others.
One of the things I'm obsessed with in life is how we have these signature themes that occur in our work, in our lives, but particularly for creative people. And at first, when I was getting to know your work over the last years, I thought, oh my God, she's everywhere. She does everything. She started as a musician. She became this incredible journalist. Now she's this amazing speaker. Now she's an author of, at first I thought three very different books. I've since revised that thought. And so I wanted to ask you, like, what do you see the signature theme of your work being?
Interestingly enough, the very first TEDx talk I ever gave was finding a mission rather than looking for a job description. And one of the things I said in there was that, it may seem odd that I'm a professional musician and then I'm a reporter. But the fact
Hmm.
is, I'm a broadcast reporter, which means essentially both of them are the same thing. They're both trying to reach people using the power of my voice. And that's still kind of my same job. It's always been a theme of my life that I tend to be effective at communicating to people,
Hmm.
and I have found, especially through reporting, that I'm quite good at distilling, and you know something about this, distilling very complicated scientific and research information down into a format that people can find understandable and relevant. So through pretty much all of my work, it's about communicating information in a way that is both emotionally and cognitively interesting and helpful.
I no, totally. I have to agree with you. I agree with you. I see that, as you study somebody's work, you see your idea of what their theme is. And I thought, yeah, it has something to do with voice and distillation. And that comes out so clearly in all of your books. I mean, speaking of race, I've been reading this past weekend and then I'd finished Do Nothing, read it a second time. And there's so much that's complicated that you make so clear. And I appreciated that over and over again because I know how hard it is.
And I think also another thing that has emerged for me, and actually this is quite tied to music, for me anyway, is trying to get people back in touch with their basic humanity and think, you know what,
Ah.
I'm enough. Like I'm a human being in all the flaws and mess that is, and that's okay. Like I can accept who I am. I can accept this, all of this, and work with that. Like figuring out what is our base humanity at its best and its worst, and accepting it has become another theme.
It has, and that's true in Do Nothing and in Speaking of Race.
Yeah. Yeah, because I think that, Do Nothing, it was odd that one of the classifications of it was as a self-help book because it's kind of an anti-self-help book. It's
I
kind of
felt
a you're okay book.
I felt so busted reading it though. I have to confess. So at the beginning, wait, now
I
listen.
love when people say that.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah,
go.
I'm sure you've heard this a lot, but this one will really make you squirm. So the beginning of this year, my husband has a regular job and he has health insurance benefits. I've been self-employed almost my whole life. Very few times in my life have I had that kind of health coverage. The insurance company gave us Fitbits. And if we do a certain things, we get money into our HSA. And for months, I would do exactly what the woman you described in the book does. I would shake my hand. And then finally, a friend of ours said, you're doing that to earn $1. So he busted me first, but you busted
Yeah.
me second. So I stopped doing it. I
Yeah.
want to promise.
Yeah, I'm so glad. It's not just you. I mean, we all do that stuff. It's funny because I tell people all the time, the reason I know so much about the stuff that I write about is because I do all of it. right? Like I bust myself all the time.
And you do that beautifully and do nothing. It really helped me to take in the message because I didn't feel preached to.
Oh, I'm so glad. That's what
Yeah.
I'm aiming for. I don't want people to feel like I'm coming down from the as the guru from the mountain saying, "Look at my life and emulate." No, I'm like, we're in this together and it's tough.
Yeah. When you look at these different things that you do, from reporting to singing to writing books to speaking to now being kind of a wellness advocate or anti-self-help person or whatever we want to call it, is there anything in the creative process of doing all of that does it all feel the same to you? Does it have a similarity? Or does it feel really different when you go into reporting mode versus singing?
Yeah, I mean, singing is it's joyful work in a way that reporting isn't necessarily joyful.
Hmm.
It's still work, but I don't have to worry when I'm doing music about accuracy, right? I don't have to worry that I'm going on the record. I can just literally let my all my
Hmm.
training and all my practice, the point of all that practice and discipline is so that when you finally get to the point of singing, you can forget it all. But in journalism, the training of all that practice and discipline is so that when you're in the moment doing the interview, it'll all come to you and be right there, right? Like, so it's almost an opposite discipline.
Hmm.
One, you're disciplining and practicing so you can forget. One, you're doing it so you can remember. So just in terms of release, it's much more cathartic for me, the music itself, than the journalism. But I take the same pleasure in both of them. I mean, I don't have any ego about my music. For, in order to make a living, the journalism side has taken over, and that's okay.
Hmm.
The world is not losing some fantastic artist by not, having CDs of my on the shelf, but I still take great joy in it.
Yeah, of course. And what about when you're speaking? Do you lose yourself when you're speaking, or is it that same sort of awareness of, and now I want to make this point?
No, when I'm speaking, that is much more like musical performance. That's an interesting point that you make, and interesting that you picked up on that, because when I am actually speaking, it is much closer to what I feel when I'm performing an aria. I get very caught up in the message, and I know it so well that I can forget all of the
Mhm,
research and stuff, and I
mhm,
can just be talking directly to people. And it's one of the things that has made virtual speeches so difficult for me,
mhm,
because I ride the reactions
mhm.
of my audience like an emotional wave. I can tell when I say something and people are like skeptical, so that I need to go, okay, I can tell that you're skeptical. Let me clarify that. And so that has made it difficult. But yeah, you are correct. The public speaking, I think one of the reasons I'm so good at that is because I have all that training as a performer.
You're very present. I noticed that in the TED Talk. I will confess that most TED Talks, I don't get past the first 3 to 4 minutes.
Yeah.
I don't know if I've watched any other TED Talk all the way through besides yours.
Wow. That's quite a compliment.
And I was completely wrapped. Is that the right way to say that word?
That is correct.
And your presence, you're very confident and present. Do you think that's come from a combination of factors, including musical training and being in conversation with thousands of people as a broadcast journalist?
I've the only musical training I've had is as a classical
Mhm.
artist. I was in classical theater before I was in classical music, ironically enough. And the music is so hard. You
Mm.
cannot think about what you just did or what's coming. You can only think about the moment that you're in. Right? If you have a high C coming, you can't be sitting there thinking about that high C. Not only because thinking about that high C changes the embouchure changes the position of your mouth. So I have to be thinking of that note, because me thinking of that note also puts it in the right position in my face and in my lips. So it is training to be an opera musician is really a training in mindfulness and presence, to be right there in that moment on that note and on that vowel. Because remember, also in singing opera, so much of it is about the vowel that you're singing,
Mhm.
and that changes the way your mouth is, it changes your resonances, etc., etc., etc. So yeah, when I'm speaking, I am telling that thing at that
Mm.
moment. Whatever that is I'm trying to convey, that is I don't even, I keep notes with me at all times because I forget which order my slides are in.
Uh-huh.
I don't remember at all because I need to be in that particular moment. I'm not really thinking ahead.
It's brilliant. You really feel it, especially as one of the things in the TED Talk to have good conversations is presence and being present. And that really made me extra aware of it when I was watching it. So this is a big question. What is a conversation?
It's a really good question because most of us label too many things as conversation. We're constantly labeling talking as conversation. Conversation is a mutual exchange of ideas.
Hmm.
That's what it is. But if you really pick that apart, right? If you have come away from a conversation and you have not received an idea or information,
Wow.
you have not had a conversation.
Wow. I mean, I say this at least 3 times in an interview, my whole body just went like you rang me like a bell.
Right.
And then I'm also want to blush for how many times it's been
So,
all about me.
yes. So if you have had a conversation and all you've done is give, that was not a mutual exchange.
Wow.
That was just talking.
Thank you so much. I kind of tear up at that.
Yeah, we tend to, and this is
Mm.
the same thing that's true in like job interviews, in every kind of discussion that we have. We focus so much on what we're going to say.
Hmm.
And we don't think to ourselves, what do I want to hear from this person? What would I like to know from this person? It's interesting because in the book Speaking of Race, I thought about this a lot. This, as you go down this thread, as you follow this thread down, it brings you into the area of rhetoric, right?
Hmm.
For centuries, some of our greatest minds used to study rhetoric. And
Yeah.
we don't think about it at all anymore. We do not think about the ethics of argument and discussion and conversation at all. But I thought about this a lot. Like, what are our ethical obligations during a conversation? What defines a conversation? What is our obligation to the other person? Do we need to establish consent before we get into these difficult discussions? What implies consent? All these issues that, again, people studied for centuries and we've just thrown them out the window. A lot of that has to do with social media, which is
Hmm.
so very casual that it's
Hmm.
bled over into our regular
Hmm. And
lives.
texting and email.
Yes. Yes. And it's bled into our regular lives. But I want to recapture this idea of as conversation as sort of the basis for what human beings do better than anything else, that it's this precious resource
Mm.
that we're kind of mishandling and taking for granted. And it's really unfortunate and it's such a waste. It's like Whitney Houston waking up at age 20 and saying, "You know what? I don't feel like singing. I'm going to be an accountant." Right? I mean, it's just like we all have this beautiful, incredible talent that we're just like, I'm not going to do that. And that's when I come back to sort of the essence of conversation. That's sort of what we're missing with all this talking, talk, 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 talk. We're missing this exchange, this beautiful, I did a lot of training in how to cover Native American communities when I was a journalist because I started my journalistic career in Arizona. And in a number of Native traditions, you can't when as a journalist you cannot go onto the Navajo reservation and just knock on the door and
Oh,
start
no,
asking.
no, no. Yeah.
Yeah, you have to you don't look them in the eye,
Right.
but you start by offering a gift first.
Mhm.
So if I walk up to the door, especially of an elder, I'm going to say, "Hello, my name is Celeste Headlee, and I work at KNAU, and I'm covering this story. And what led to me this story is I had this interest in blah 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 blah, and this is why I think this is important." I'm going to give something of myself to them before I ask them to give something in return. It's this exchange. But I have to, in good faith, offer the trade first. And it's for me, this is a beautiful way to realize that this exchange we have during conversations is precious. It is a gift that people give you when they give you their story. And it's one that we just don't value as much as I think we should.
We're afraid of it.
Yes.
And
We
one of
think
the
it
things that,
makes us obligated.
honestly, I think for me, You wrote about this so well in Do Nothing, and everybody, you just have to read all the books and see the TED Talk because we're covering it all. But in Do Nothing, you talked about how we have to hear each other's voices.
Yeah.
We're not getting this through text and email. And yet I find myself wanting to hide
Yeah.
behind text and email. And some of it is the productivity conversation that I need to maximize every moment of my time, which you really blew apart for me. Like, just another layer of it. I had such a better weekend after rereading Do Nothing. I got to tell you, I'm like,
Oh,
I'm
that
just going
makes
to
me
sit
so
here and
happy.
draw, and I'm going to sit here and like, it's not because I have to become good at this. I'm never going to be good at this. I don't care. I like it. But you made me realize how important it is to force myself to pick up the phone and have these conversations. And yet, why are we afraid of it?
That is a question that scientists have been trying to answer for quite some time now, because I mean, you've read the books. Conversation, unless it's competitive or hostile, they're good for us. They're so
Mhm.
good for
And they
us.
feel good.
Yeah, and we feel better after we have them. They do all these tests in which they tell people, okay, we're going to force you to interact with someone and have a short conversation.
Mhm.
And everybody predicts, I'm going to hate this. And then at the end of the study, everyone's like, actually, I really enjoyed that. And this happens, it was interesting. Gillian Sandstrom, she's the scientist that I spent time with observing her experiment in the UK. And she actually did a similar experiment with some docents at a museum, because the museum was trying to encourage the docents to start up conversations with museum
Mhm.
goers, because it ended up making both parties feel good,
Mhm.
right? So she went through this whole thing, and she's like, maybe they're just afraid, maybe they don't know what to say, so we're going to do training to help them figure out how to do small talk and start up these conversations. And again, you had this thing with all the docents were like, I'm going to hate this. Then they went through the training and they were like, actually, that wasn't that bad. And I really enjoyed it. And then the last question on their survey was, so do you think you'll do more of this in the future? And they said, nope.
Oh.
I mean, you know, I don't know what to say to that. We just we make this dumb choice all the time, and it's counterproductive and it's self-destructive, and it just brings me back to something Noam Chomsky said, which is that we don't know yet if humans are a viable species.
I love that quote. I had never heard that quote before. I'm like, well, clearly I do a lot of climate activism stuff. And I'm like, clearly that's one question, but also this human question.
Yeah.
And I have to sometimes put it on my to-do list,
Yeah,
Celeste.
which is okay. I mean, I even say this in the book. I'm like, if you need to schedule your social time in, then do that. We are fighting a tide.
Mhm.
Right? I mean, our entire society is built around this, turning us into machines, productive machines. I even saw some interview with some woman saying, well, we should all be aiming for diversity and inclusion because it makes workers more productive. I thought, wow, wow.
Yeah,
Um,
thanks for just making me part of the machine.
and also, like, what is the point of the work? Isn't the
Yeah,
work to make us enjoy isn't the only purpose of the work to give us what it is that we need in order to have happy, well, healthy lives?
yeah,
I mean, so yeah, I don't know why we keep avoiding it. I
yeah.
really, really don't know.
Do you still avoid it?
No,
No.
no. I've become much more aware of when I'm out of that energy.
Mm.
After I give an in-person keynote, and even sometimes when it's virtual, and I'm riding the plane back home, I don't want anyone looking at me or touching me or talking to me. I've just poured out
Yeah,
all of this social energy. And of course, after you give a speech, everyone rushes up to talk to you, and
right.
you're engaged and you're
Yeah.
answering questions and hearing their stories. And I'm just very aware of my state of being at
Mhm.
every time. And
Mhm.
I've learned to do, the body scan, to check down through my body and say, how are we doing, Celeste? How are you feeling? What's our mood? What's our energy level? But I don't avoid conversations anymore. I'm like the conversation warrior. Somebody
Mhm.
called me an evangelist, and I am that.
I love it. I love it. It's profound. So let's turn to the new book as much as I want to keep talking about everything. So if it's hard for us to have conversations with our friends, it's probably going to be more difficult for us to have conversations about race.
Yeah. But it's hard for us to have those conversations about race even with our friends.
That's true. That's true.
Because our friends say stuff that we find even minorly problematic, or they make some joke where we're like, eh,
Yeah.
and we don't say anything.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that goes the other way. If we're doing that about things other people say, I'm sure other people are cringing about some of the things we say, and they're not telling us, which means we're not learning and we're not growing and we're not getting better. So I actually want us to start with our friends and our family members and the people that we care about and are closest to us. Start there. That probably feels safer than having that conversation with somebody who looks different from you. However, that's where it's all going, right? Because we're not going to solve this until we can get those conversations going. But yeah, we're avoiding conversation even when it's about like what to have for dinner. So we're even more avoiding them when it comes to race. And I find that even more so, and again, this is anecdotal just from workshops I carry out, but I find that when people do have these conversations about race, they are even more focused on what it is they want to say.
Oh my God, yes. I didn't think about that. Here's another big aha for me. Of course, I remember I was raised in a very racist family. My dad was born in 1919. He was raised in the South.
Sorry.
Yeah. I mean, he grew and changed. It was amazing. He listened to us kids, but there was so much to work through.
Yeah.
So many years of me having to, I mean, it'll be a lifetime's work to everything you can imagine. And so I've been doing it for a long time because you get out of your little house, your little world, and you go into the big world and you're like, oh, holy shit, this needs, this story that dad is a good racist can't stand anymore. All the ways you try to protect your parents, right? And then you have friendships with people who haven't had to confront that stuff. And I used to want to preach. You're completely right. I feel so busted again. And it's so unproductive.
It's incredibly unproductive. I mean, number one, you may get a little, dopamine shot, but are you really enjoying it? You've said all that stuff before.
You're not enjoying it. You're exhausting yourself.
All before. You're not, really having a great, I mean, if they're listening to you at all, it's like, glazed eyes and just a tilted head, right? So yeah, with these conversations about race, we either want to preach them, as you say, or we go in there thinking about what we're going to say to prove we are not racist.
Oh yeah, that was me for many years. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's why like the whole first section of the book is focused on internal work, right? And it's why I started it where I did by saying, take a breath, you're biased. Racist is not the worst thing someone can say to you, because guess what? It's true. You are.
Exactly.
So let's get past that.
Years ago, I wrote a blog post called Yes, I'm a Racist. And I got so much pushback from people for calling myself a racist. I'm like, hello, that was early in the study of bias. I mean, not super early, but just
the study of bias is very recent.
So it was, I'm looking at the science. I can just point to the science. So take us through some of the ways that we can, well, at least one of the ways we can do a little of that inner work, because we can't overcome our unconscious bias. It's always going to be operating to some degree. I mean, I know my mindfulness training helps.
I think the first thing is, number one, what we were just talking about, which is stop focusing so much on what it is that you want to say.
Okay.
And focus more, understand that you are not an expert in race, right? That doesn't really exist.
I love that part of the book. I loved when you said that.
Yeah. So like, you're always going to be a student in this area. So understand that first and focus on learning other people's stories and how they came to understand their own racial identity. The other thing is to slow down, because as I point out in the book, going back to the work of Daniel Kahneman in terms of system 1 and system 2 thinking, just really quickly for those people listening, system 1 thinking is all those automatic thought that happens. I think it's something like 98% of your, somewhere between 92 and 98% of your thought is unconscious, right? You don't think about what it takes to open a door, you just do it. That's your really quick thinking that occurs. Sadly, we put things that should be in system 2 thinking, these slower, more contemplative, more careful thought processes, into system 1. So we'll see a person of a different race and we will immediately associate with them all the qualities that have been fed to us by our families and our media and our books and all of the other things. So we need to slow down a little bit. Don't open up and state your opinion or ask questions right away. Take a breath before you speak. And, frankly, we're all too fast talking as it is. It's okay to slow down the pace of conversation and take that moment. I always find, as people's, so when you're singing African American spirituals, it's common for them to speed up, and conductors are constantly trying to slow choirs down, right? Because it's just natural. They get into it and they start speeding up and speeding up and speeding up until the conductor's like, look, this is supposed to be work music. Like they're doing the working of, so it needs to be a steady rhythm. And I see this all the time in conversations about race where people are like until they're talking on top of one another. If we can slow it down, bring it back down to a steady and more give the outer folds of your brain where all the executive thinking and decision making is housed, time to weigh in. And we see this in children, right? Like you see a toddler reach for a hot pan and there's no executive decision making. It's just, oh, that looks interesting, grab. And then you see your children as they learn that hurts. You see that weigh in, right? You see the arm reach out and then suddenly those outer folds weigh in and they go, oh, wait, and they pull their hands back. We need to do as well as a 3-year-old and slow down.
So we're always going to be students, but we're so afraid of getting it wrong.
Yeah.
And there's another layer that I've been aware of, maybe more in the last 5 years. And that is white people. I can only speak for the white people I hang out with them myself, being really afraid to say anything because there's been some shaming that's happened sometime, not from people of color in my life, but from white people to white people, and using a lot of the white fragility language, I think severely misusing it. And so I see a lot of well-meaning friends, people in organizations, people in power in organizations that I know really shutting down and struggling. And I will be recommending your book for this, but if they're listening now, what can we tell them?
The first thing is be open that you are trying to work on this and bring other people in on the journey to help you. It's, when somebody's trying to train for a marathon or any kind of health goal, for example, they'll say, bring your community into it because that will keep you on track. It'll get you into the gym that day. It'll, same with smoking. And I would say the same is true here. Like tell people, I've noticed that I'm using microaggressions. I'm not always noticing them. It's coming out of my unconscious bias and I need your help. Let's set this up. If I use a microaggression in the meeting, there's a stack of yellow cards in the middle of the table. Throw a yellow card, right? Yeah. You don't have to explain it to. I'm not going to put you in the position of being my Google search. You don't have to educate me, but just let me know that it's happened. This is what I would say to people. Don't make it some kind of shameful secret. I mean, you know this from childhood education. The things you don't talk about are the things children immediately associate with shame. And that's not something children do, it's something humans do. So the less we talk about this openly, the more it becomes kind of shameful secret. So just be honest. Look, I'm a white person and I'm gonna say the wrong thing. Like, I honestly don't know that. I went up to one of my neighbors who I just met really recently, a few weeks ago, and his family's from Nepal, a guy named Atul. And he was talking about Thanksgiving. And I said, I am so uninformed in this area. Like, I know where Nepal is. I know all the how it's appeared in movies and stuff, but I don't what kind of food do
Mhm.
you, is traditional Nepalese food? He's like, "Well, have you had Pakistani?" And I was like, "Yes." He's like, "Yeah, it's like Indian food or Pakistani food. It's just way less spicy than Indian food. Those Indian people are crazy. They put too much spice in their food." Essentially, right? And I tried to be completely open about it. I wasn't trying to say stuff. You know how sometimes people will start talking and they'll be watching
Yes,
the other
yes,
person
yes.
really carefully to see what their reaction is? Don't do that. Just say, I don't know what I'm talking about here. Here's what I know. Which part of that is dumb and uninformed? I really want to know. You don't have to tell me. I will go home and do my research, I promise, but help me out here. And this is what I would suggest with leaders as well: transparency.
Mhm,
Admit your humanity. Of
mhm,
course, you are not an expert on race. You're a white person. And although that is a race, when it comes to cultural race,
mhm,
it's been the default race for a very long time. So, of course, you don't know the difference, perhaps, between sub Saharan Africa and Northern Africa, between Western Africa and Eastern Africa, between South America and Central American traditions. Of course, you don't.
mhm.
Ask, get people to help you.
It's so simple and it makes such sense. It's such, reading speaking of race, like over and over again, I felt myself asking myself, why have you felt so ashamed? I mean, I remember feeling ashamed to even say the word race.
That makes me sad. Yeah.
Like let's, my daughter she's 27. She works in pediatric mental health, and they spend a lot of time in the hospital working on race issues and race awareness for the staff. And she's done some protests and, et cetera. And she asked me for a meeting that they had. Did you ever teach me that color blindness was a thing? And I said, yes, I did. When you were in seventh grade and you brought your first boyfriend home, or eighth grade, and he was Black, I thought, oh my God, it's worked. We're post race.
Oh
I
God.
know, I know. You guys, it was a while ago. All
It's okay to
right.
talk about this. It's okay.
I was so
Yeah.
embarrassed to admit it to her,
There's this
right?
great book called Race Talk and the Conspiracy of Silence by this wonderful scholar named Daryl Wing Su. And in it he describes a story that he heard of this young mother going through the grocery store, and they see a Chinese man, and the daughter says, "Oh, why are his eyes like that?" And the mom's like, "Oh my God," and she
Right,
runs away.
right.
Where what the only reason that would be bad to point out that his eyes look different from hers is if there's something bad about having eyes that look different, right?
Right.
Like, this is what we're communicating to people by not talking about this. Of course, my skin is different than yours.
Mhm.
Of course, we all it's okay to point that out, as long the only thing that makes that bad is if we're associating bad things with that difference.
Right.
So we just have to talk about this stuff. This is, and frankly, I would much rather that this conversation move really confidently into white circles, because you guys are the most effective at checking each other.
Because there's less of that guilt and shame.
Yeah, and you just look, it's built into our unconscious biases that when
Right.
people of color bring it up, we're seen as troublemakers and
Right.
complainers. We're not
Right.
believed. We're often punished for it in our careers or even in our
Mhm,
social relationships.
mhm,
Whereas when white people, especially white men, bring it up, not only are they believed, not only are they seen as credible, but they're often rewarded for bringing those things up. I mean, our in our unconscious bias, we're like, wow, look at what a great guy Tom Hanks is because he doesn't hate Black people. Oh my God, he's fantastic. Let's give him every reward possible.
Oh my God. It's so true. It's just like when, yes, oh God, I think
Nothing
about,
against Tom Hanks.
no, no, you can be
But
like, yes, thanks, Tom Hanks, but you throw him another cookie.
it's like when the Me Too scandal broke out, and at one
Mhm.
point Matt Damon said, we're not giving enough credit to the guys who don't rape women or harass women." And I'm like, dude, Matt Damon, I love you, but you don't get a cookie for not attacking women.
Oh God, it's so sad. I don't even know why I'm laughing.
Yeah.
Ugh.
So like I do want I want people to be open about what the mistakes they've made. I
Mhm.
tried to put a bunch of mine in there and be open about the mistakes you've made and own them and don't feel shame of just and I think I make this comparison in the book, but it's like, if you're walking through the office and somebody says, "Ow, you kicked me." You don't suddenly say, "No, I didn't," or "That didn't hurt. You're being overly sensitive. I was just kidding." Right? You say, "Oh, sorry. I'm
Yeah.
sorry."
Yeah.
And that's it.
Yeah.
When someone says you've said something inappropriate, you've said something racist, they're saying, "You hurt me." And you simply say, "I'm so sorry."
Mhm. Now, let me ask you, mistake place. Do you then ask, what can I do differently in the future? Or is that considered asking someone to do emotional labor for you?
It can be. What I usually suggest is that you say something like, "Do you have time, or are you would you mind telling me, because I can do my own research
Because
if you're."
that's the consent part
Right. This is
again.
the consent.
Mhm,
Are you willing to do this? Because I can do
mhm,
my own research.
mhm.
And I only say that because people of color are so tired. They're really tired, and they may not be in the place where they're able to explain that to you. They may be mad. The incident may have triggered all the other incidents in their life at which they
Mhm.
felt disrespected and dehumanized, and they just may not be in that emotional place. So it's okay to say, "Oh my God, I'm so sorry. I'm really sorry that I hurt your feelings." Do not say, "I didn't intend to hurt your feelings," because your intention doesn't really matter. Just like
Right.
with kicking you in the shin, doesn't matter if you intended to or not, their shin is still aching. You say, "I'm sorry. I'm very sorry. I want to make sure I don't do that again. Do you have a moment to tell me? Because I'm willing to do this research on my own. But if you have a moment, I'd love to know more about what I did wrong."
I love
And
that.
then
That's very clear.
allow them to say no, And if they do say no, say, "Again, I'm sorry. I'm going to do better." Right? This is your promise. It's not just you saying, "I'm sorry." It's not you saying, expressing regret over what you've done, but it's also, that's your amends. That's so essential for a good apology. I'm going to make amends. I'm going to do better in the future. And then do it.
Right. Do
actually
it.
do that.
Is it exhausting for you to talk about this book?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I didn't want to write it. My editor came to me and said, "Do you want to write this book?" And I said, "No." I changed my mind obviously later, but I got to tell you, I were worried about me. Like,
Oh.
when I finished this book, I crashed for like 2 weeks. I just crashed, and I did not. It was surprising to me that it had that effect, but it was exhausting. And there's stories in here that I tell that I've literally never told a single other person in my life. The paper bag, the lunch bag story with my friend at the
Mm.
playground, I never told anybody that story. It felt shameful to me. And everyone was looking at me, and it was hard. Writing this book is hard, and supporting it through interviews is hard. Yeah, but it's a mitzvah. I'm Black and Jewish. it's
Yeah. Yeah.
it's like, this is, if my gift is to be able to explain things to people in a way that does not make them feel defensive or
Mhm,
stupid,
mhm.
then I mean, what more important area than the area of race? So, you know yeah, I'm not a saint. I'm horrible in many ways. I'm just saying that this is my work to do, and I'm going to do the work.
Yeah. Yeah. That's, I think, what we're supposed to do in life. We're supposed
Yeah,
to
I
do the
mean,
work we're called to do as best we can.
yeah, with and complain about it as little as possible. And when I was trying to make the decision to make the book, at one point I was like, how do I look my ancestors in the eye who marched and risked their lives? And I was
Mhm.
like, no, that emotional labor of writing this book when I've been offered a major deal from a publishing house is too much for me. I mean, at some point I was like, come on, right? Get over yourself, Celeste.
Yeah.
So yeah, obviously I went ahead and wrote it, but it was, it's hard. It's hard. And I look at people like Emer Rex Kendi or like
Mhm.
Isabel Wilkerson, and I just think, I mean, my God, they are, in there all the time.
Yeah.
I mean, I can talk about other stuff.
Right. You
Well,
have this huge body of
yeah, I have
work.
this other things to talk about. They are going back again and again and again.
Yeah.
Nicole Hannah Jones. And
Yeah.
that takes the kind of backbone and grit that I don't think I have.
Yeah. Fair enough too. We have to, I mean, we go back to earlier in the conversation. I help you embrace your humanity. So you have to embrace your own humanity.
Yeah.
I want to switch gears for a second because talking about getting the book deal for Speaking of Race, I'm always really curious when there's this big moment of success that kind of comes out of nowhere. And the TED Talk was like that for you. And what was that like and how did you handle it?
I didn't believe it, and I maintained that level of not believing for an almost ridiculous amount of time.
Why?
Look, I've been a single mother for most of my adult life. I have been absolutely on the edge of absolute financial disaster so many times. I've held down 6 or 7 jobs just to get regular bills paid. I've always been financially insecure
Mhm.
forever and ever and ever. And to a certain extent, part of me didn't want to believe, because that catastrophe is just around the bend and you don't want it to hurt that much when things come crashing down. So like I remember when I started getting all of the offers to come and speak for increasing amounts of money. And I think my speaking fee now in person is like 32.5, right?
Oh my God, yes!
Yeah.
Oh,
I'm able to ask for that much because so many people want me to speak. We're
oh my
like,
God, I love that so much.
so like, but me in 2015, if you had said, okay, so I'll tell you this. When I got my very first speaking gig, it was from the International Interior Decorators Association, something like that. And they said, we want you to come give a keynote. And we wondered how much. And I was like, $1,000? And they went, yes, thank you. You're booked. And I was like, uh-oh, I guess I asked for too little. So the next first people came in, it was like the Houston Realtors Association. And I was like, $1,500? They're like, yes, okay. And I was like, I better get an agent. So like this all dawned on me extremely slowly. It was like a slow moving tidal wave where I was like, oh. And then I remember at one point I was in the airport flying somewhere, and I'd forgotten to bring a phone charger, so I went to the little shop and I said, "Hey, I need to get a phone charger." And blah, 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 blah. And the woman behind the counter goes, "Are you Celeste Headlee?" And I was like, "Yes." And she's like, "Oh my God, I recognize your voice. I listen to all your audiobooks and I watch your TED Talk a billion times." And I was like, "Okay, so I think this is happening. Like, I think maybe."
You have to change your identity. You had to change your identity almost, would you say?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Very much so. I also got to give free rein to parts of my identity that I
Like
hadn't been
what?
able to express. So I super like to throw parties and give presents.
Oh,
And like I just like to give presents. Like,
I want that gift. Can you teach me how to have that gift? I'm so bad at giving gifts.
so I've cards printed up. I'll read them to you.
Okay.
And I give them with gifts. It says, "You've received a present. Hi there. I like to buy gifts. Giving gifts is one of my favorite things to do, but I never want my gift to make you feel awkward. I don't expect a gift in return, even on my birthday. I do not keep score and feel disappointed when people don't buy the same amount of gifts for me as I buy for them. Sometimes I buy gifts for people I barely know or just met. In some cases, I buy gifts that people love. Other times, I give them things they don't really like. It's okay to tell me. I promise I won't take it personally. It's also okay to re-gift them or just give it to the Goodwill. A gift should never become a burden. Thanks for allowing me to indulge myself. You're the best. Celeste."
That's so unbelievable. Wow.
So having more income,
You could
like,
get more gifts.
exactly. And I throw 4 parties a year and I am so extra. It's not even funny. I throw the same 4 parties every year.
Themed.
Yeah. In the spring, it's Party Gras. In the summer, it's Midsummer Night's Drink. In October, it's Cheers for Fears, and I'm just coming up on my winter one, which is Ludicrismas. So that's a lot, that was always inside me, but I never was able to express that part of my personality. So, yeah.
This, as you say this, it reminds me of the feeling that I got, just to go back to Do Nothing, like reading about the story tapes that you used to make. And I thought, well, I always made really cool like cassette mixtapes, but I never thought about story tapes. But that book gave me, and I'm sure so many other people, so much permission to have that kind of fun again without it having to improve me, make me skinnier, make me more fit, make me a better writer, make me a better writing teacher, make me a better fucking podcaster.
Yeah. I mean, whatever happened to just doing stuff because you like it?
I know. Whatever happened to that? But I didn't realize until I read Do Nothing that it was that productivity culture message, even though I knew all that research, my friend. I didn't put it together, which again is one of your talents. I didn't put it together with my free time.
Yeah.
And how I always felt that I should be doing something useful or getting better at it or getting better at something.
The research for that book was a huge eye-opener for me. And when I started doing all this research, and I think I even complained about it in the book, all the freaking boring books on labor practices going back to the times of the ancient Greeks. I do not recommend that to anybody. Just don't.
You don't have to. You have your book. You don't have to do it
for you. But when I started to realize how much changed in the Industrial Revolution, and it never even occurred to me, when people say time is money, it never occurred to me that that's a super recent idea.
Mm-hmm.
That you cannot count your time in terms of money. In fact, if you think about it, how ridiculous that is. And for most of 300,000 years, we didn't measure it that way. We would bring in a harvest and then we'd party for 2 weeks.
We'd have one of your themed parties.
Yeah, we would have a wedding and there was a 1-week-long party.
Yeah.
You don't drive to someone's wedding, celebrate for 2 hours and hope that you can get home because you got to get that email to stew, right? And so like this whole idea that work is the point of our existence, rather than we're existing. Uh-oh, we need something, we better go work. Okay, we did that. Let's get back to our existence, right? That's how we've lived for most of our lives. And look at what it's done to us to flip that on its head.
And I don't think you really talked about this in Do Nothing, but I wanted to ask you, do you think the idea of passion in our work has become a new twist? Because I know for me, it was always like, I am only going to do work I love. And I've been pretty darn lucky, although that was a very naive view. I realized, a good 25 years ago, but I do love what I do, and it has its own shadow to it. Did you think about that in the Do Nothing?
I thought about it a
framework?
lot because I have been saying to myself all the time, my son, he's probably the true progenitor of Do Nothing, because he's always was saying, you work too much, you work too much, you work too much. Oh, he would tell his friends, my mom doesn't know how to relax. And I would say, but I love what I do, right? Yeah, you can love what you do, but it's still work. Right. Like you're fooling yourself if you think that your passion for what you do means that's allowed to take over yourself as a human being. Like I believe that the work that I do makes the world a better place. But the better place for whom? For human beings, right? My whole purpose is to make the world a better place for human beings. And in order to do this, I make the world worse for not just myself as a human being, but all the people in my life. I'm not seeing my friends or my relatives or spending enough time with my son, obviously. And those things are supposed to balance. No. Like the people whose lives I have the most impact on are those closest to me. So I'm not going to spend all of that time and energy on people where I may have an impact, but it's going to be a ripple a mile out in the ocean. As opposed to what I can do right here in front of me.
Yeah. Can you just keep preaching to me? Just keep preaching to me. I need to hear all of this. It's so I just you're hitting me deep in my heart today. I thank you for that.
You know, after I wrote We Need to Talk, one of the
Mhm.
most common questions I would get from audiences was, how do I get my kid to get off their phone? Every time I see my kid, she's on her phone, on her phone, on her phone. And I always say, are you modeling that? Do you leave the house without your phone sometimes? Do you go to have dinner without your phone? When your phone rings, do you sometimes ignore it? Are you constantly checking? Do you watch a movie with your phone next to you? Or are you expecting your kids to behave in a different way than you're behaving?
What do they say?
There's silence. There's almost always silence.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not part of the phone world, but there's plenty of other things that
But this is the same thing that's true with
yeah.
overwork.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. I fully cop to it.
Yeah.
I fully
Yeah.
cop to it. I'm working on it. Celeste, you're awesome.
Oh, thanks.
You're so awesome. I have this last question that I ask my guests. What do you want to learn next?
So, what I want to learn next, I have a friend of mine who doesn't see adverse events as a reflection on her character. And I want to learn how to do that. I want to learn how, if she's sore one day, she doesn't think, oh God, I'm not taking good care of myself. She thinks, oh, what's causing my soreness? Or, if something goes wrong. What was it? She was talking to me the other day. She's about the same age as I am, and she was saying, "Oh, I've stopped I turning a certain way in the shower." Like, I guess her whole life she's been to do one thing in the shower. She'd always turn, and because she's getting older, she's like, this could be a big problem. And I thought to myself, how revolutionary is that small thing? Where she's like, I'm getting older. I'm not capable of doing this anymore, and I don't have to feel shameful about it at all. Like, I'm not capable of doing this. This is not me admitting I'm an old fogey. This is what's happening to my body. That's what I wanna learn from her.
It's fantastic. Me too. And I want to learn how to have better conversations about race. So thank you for that book. And I'll be reading it and rereading it and really pondering how I can keep learning how to do that and not
I
shy away from it and not be afraid.
Yeah, good luck.
Thank you.